A scream pierces the fog, swallowed by the roar of the North Sea. On velvet pier, a body lies cold, a jeweled dagger gleaming in its back. Who struck Sir Reginald Harrington down in the dead of night? Was it his grieving widow, hiding tears of guilt? A rival cloaked in ambition? Or a shadow from the past, seeking revenge? In Eldridge's misty embrace, Hercule Poirot steps forward, his grey cells poised to unravel a killer's velvet deception. Pause for 15 seconds, with low, ominous wave sounds building tension. 5. The fog-shrouded pier. The mist clung to velvet pier like a shroud woven from the very breath of the North Sea, thick and impenetrable, swallowing the world in its grey embrace. It was the autumn of 1932, a time when the coastal town of Eldridge seemed suspended in a perpetual twilight, where the boundaries between land and sea blurred into obscurity. The pier itself, a relic of bygone Victorian grandeur, stretched out into the churning waters like a skeletal finger accusing the heavens. Its wooden planks, weathered by decades of salt and storm, groaned mournfully under the relentless assault of the waves, each creak echoing like a lament from the deep. Named for the luxurious velvet-upholstered benches that lined its length, faded now to a mottled crimson, stained by rain and neglect, the pier had once been a promenade for the elite. Ladies in bustled gowns and gentlemen with monocles would stroll here, sipping champagne under gas lamps that flickered like fireflies. But those days were ghosts, much like the town itself, haunted by the decline of the fishing industry and the rise of Sir Reginald Harrington's industrial empire. Harrington's factories belched smoke inland, choking the air with coal dust, while out here on the pier, the sea air remained a fleeting purity, tainted only by the fog's insidious creep. Fishermen, those hardy souls who braved the tides daily, whispered of ill omens that night. Old Silas Thorne, a grizzled mariner with a face etched by wind and worry, had muttered to his mates in the dim light of the harbor pub, "The fog's thicker than widow."
Rhythmic fury, spraying foam that glistened like tears in the faint light. It was in this veil of obscurity that Sir Reginald Harrington met his end. A man of considerable girth and even greater ambition, Reginald had built his fortune on the backs of Eldridge's labourers. His factories produced textiles and machinery that supplied half of England's needs. But at what cost? Whispers abounded. Workers crippled in accidents, wages slashed to bones, rivals crushed under heel. Yet Reginald strode through life with the arrogance of untouchability, his portly frame clad in bespoke suits, his fingers adorned with rings that flashed like warnings. That evening he had dined at Harrington Manor, perched on the cliffs overlooking the pier. The manor, a sprawling edifice of stone and ivy, was a testament to his wealth. Towers piercing the sky, windows gazing imperiously over the domain he claimed as his own. His young wife, Lady Evelyn, a vision of ethereal beauty with raven hair and eyes like storm-tossed seas, had hosted a tense affair. Guests included his business partner Victor Langford, a slick operator with a smile that never reached his eyes, his nephew Edmund, a dissolute youth squandering inheritance on cards and horses, and the maid Amelia Croft, gliding silently with trays of crystal decanters. Arguments had simmered like the fog outside. Victor pressed for expansions that Reginald resisted, citing costs. Edmund begged for advances on his allowance, met with scornful refusal. Evelyn, ever the gracious hostess, had retired early, her cheeks flushed, from wine or anger. Reginald, dismissing the company with a wave, announced a solitary walk to clear his head. "The pier calls to me," he'd said cryptically, donning his overcoat and vanishing into the night. Hours passed. The town slept uneasily, dogs barking at shadows, windows rattling in the gale. At dawn's first blush,
A feeble grey light piercing the mist, Silas Thorne made his grim discovery. Trudging to the pier for his morning launch, his boots thudding dully on the damp wood, he nearly tripped over the obstruction. There, sprawled face down amid the velvet benches, lay Sir Reginald Harrington. His body was contorted in death's awkward
On the wind. Fishermen roused, townsfolk gathered, a murmur rippling through Eldridge like the tide itself. Who could have slain the Titan on this isolated spur? The pier was accessible only by a narrow path from the cliffs, gated and locked at night. Yet the lock was intact, suggesting familiarity, an insider's knowledge. The local constable arrived first, a bumbling sort named Hargrove, puffing from the climb. He poked at the body with his truncheon, muttering prayers under his breath. Stabbed clean through the heart, by the looks. No struggle. Surprise attack. Footprints? The fog and overnight drizzle had erased them, leaving only vague impressions in the mud near the entrance. A single item caught his eye. A velvet glove, lady's size, embroidered with the initials E.H., discarded nearby. Evelyn Harrington? It reeked of implication. Word spread like wildfire through the cobbled streets. In the bakery, loaves burned forgotten as gossips converged. "The widow did it! Married for money she was!" clucked Mrs. Abernathy, the baker's wife. "Or that partner, Langford, always scheming." At the pub, bets were placed. Nephew for debts, maid for slighted honor, even Thorne himself, who bore grudges over drowned fishing grounds. Lady Evelyn was informed at the manor, collapsing into hysterics amid the antique furnishings. "My husband! Gone!" she wailed, her black dress already donned as if prescient. Servants fluttered like moths. Amelia Croft fetched smelling salts, her face impassive. The police cordoned the pier, but the fog had done its work, cloaking secrets. Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard was summoned from London, his train chugging into the station by noon. And in a quaint hotel overlooking the harbor, the Sea Mist Inn, with its lace curtains and brass beds, a certain Belgian detective stirred from his morning tea. Hercule Poirot, on a rare holiday to escape the clamor of the city, perused the local paper with his customary precision. His mustache impeccably waxed.
Poirot does not ignore such invitations from fate. The path to the pier wound through bracken and thorns, the air heavy with ozone. Arriving, he surveyed the tableau. Body removed now, outline chalked, evidence bagged. Japp greeted him warmly. "Poirot, what brings you?" "Destiny, mon ami. Tell me all." As Japp recounted, Poirot's mind whirred. The stage was set, suspects shadowed. But the first act had only begun, and the fog promised more veils to lift. Or tighten. Chapter 2. The Arrival of the Little Belgian. The fog draped Velvet Pier in a spectral shroud, its tendrils curling around the weathered planks, as if to guard the secrets of the previous night's horror. The morning of October 1932 was chill and damp, the air heavy with the scent of salt and decay, as if the sea itself mourned Sir Reginald Harrington's violent end. Hercule Poirot, the diminutive Belgian detective with a penchant for order and an unrivaled flair for deduction, stepped onto the pier with the precision of a metronome, his patent leather shoes clicking against the wood, in defiance of the damp that sought to tarnish them. His overcoat, immaculately tailored, fluttered slightly in the sea breeze, and his iconic moustache, waxed to perfection, twitched as he surveyed the scene of the crime. "Mon ami," he addressed Inspector Japp, who had summoned him from his holiday at the Sea Mist Inn with an urgency that betrayed the gravity of the situation. "This fog, it is like the veil over the human soul. Mysterious, yes, but penetrable by the little grey cells." Inspector Japp, a man of solid build and a no-nonsense disposition, stood with his hands thrust deep into the pockets of his overcoat, his own less ostentatious moustache bristling with irritation. A Scotland Yard veteran, Japp was accustomed to the grim realities of murder. Yet the peculiarity of this case, the isolation of the pier, the absence of witnesses, the audacity of the crime, gnawed at him. "Poirot, old chap," he said, his voice roughened by the morning's chill. "We've got a proper puzzle here. Sir Reginald Harrington,
bitterness toward the deceased. The body, sprawled among the velvet-upholstered benches, bore a single wound from a jeweled dagger, an artifact from Reginald's private collection, its hilt encrusted with rubies that glinted mockingly in the dawn light. The blood, now dried to a rusty stain, had pooled around him, mingling with the salt-water spray that clung to the planks. A velvet glove, embroidered with the initials E.H., lay discarded nearby, a clue too conspicuous to be accidental. The pier's isolation, accessible only by a gated path from the cliffs, suggested the killer was someone familiar with the town, someone with access and intent. Poirot paused at the chalked outline where Reginald's body had lain, his gloved hand hovering over the bloodstain, as if to coax secrets from its mute testimony. The dagger. Exquisite, is it not? A collector's piece, likely from his own study. And this glove, E.H. Evelyn Harrington, the widow, perhaps, or a cunning misdirection. He straightened, his gaze sweeping the pier's length, where the fog still lingered like a conspirator, obscuring the horizon. The fog, it erases much, but not the truth. The little grey cells, they will find it. Japp grunted, leading Poirot toward the cliff path to Harrington Manor, where the investigation awaited. The manor, a Gothic edifice perched like a brooding sentinel above the sea, loomed through the mist, its spires piercing the grey sky. As they ascended the winding path, Japp outlined the suspects, his voice low, as if wary of eavesdroppers. First, there's Lady Evelyn Harrington, the widow. Married Reginald 5 years ago, a match some called mercenary. She was a beauty with no fortune, he a wealthy widower. Rumours say their marriage was strained. She was seen arguing with him at dinner last night. Then there's Victor Langford, his business partner in the factories. Sharp fellow, but they clashed over profits recently. Something about Langford pushing for risky expansions. Amelia Croft, the maid, on details. Thorne insists he was at sea, mending nets, but who can verify in that weather? They reached the manor's iron gates, where a constable stood guard, his face pale under his helmet. Inside the grand hall was a study in opulence and melancholy. Crystal chandeliers cast dim light on portraits of stern-faced Harrington ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow the intruders. Lady Evelyn received them in the drawing room, a cavernous space adorned with velvet drapes and mahogany furniture, the air heavy with the scent of beeswax and grief. She stood by a roaring fire, her black mourning dress accentuating her porcelain pallor, her raven hair pinned elegantly despite her red-rimmed eyes. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice a tremulous whisper. "Inspector Japp says you are a man of great insight. My husband. I loved him, despite what they say. Who could do this?" Poirot bowed, his manner courtly yet probing. "Madame, my condolences. But love,
It is a complex tapestry, woven with threads of passion and pain. May I ask, your disagreement last night? It was significant, no? Her eyes darted to Japp, then back to Poirot, a flicker of unease betraying her composure. A trifle. Reginald was stubborn about business matters. We spoke of the factories, nothing more. Her fingers twisted a lace handkerchief, and Poirot noted the gesture, nervous or rehearsed. Before he could press further, Victor Langford entered, his tailored suit impeccable, but his expression taut. "Poirot, is it? I've heard of your reputation. This is a tragedy, but don't waste time on me. I was in my office when Reginald was killed." His voice was smooth, but his left hand, Poirot observed, clenched briefly, a telltale sign of strain. Amelia Croft glided in with a tea tray, her movements precise yet hesitant, her auburn hair tucked under a cap. Her eyes, a startling blue, avoided Poirot's gaze as she set the tray down. "Monsieur, Inspector," she murmured, retreating quickly. Poirot's brow. Lady Evelyn's tears, were they genuine? Langford's composure, was it a facade? Amelia's silence, what did it conceal? Edmund's bravado, was it fear? And Thorne, the outsider, what grudge drove him? A servant delivered a message. Thorne awaited at his fisherman's shack, claiming evidence. Poirot resolved to visit, but as he stepped into the hall, a chill ran through him. A velvet curtain stirred, though no breeze reached it. A whisper of deceit, or merely the manor's draught. He adjusted his hat, his resolve firm. The game was afoot, and the little Belgian would unravel the threads, no matter how tangled. No matter how tangled. For in the fog of Velvet Pier, truth awaited, and Poirot's grey cells were already at work, piecing together the mosaic of murder. Chapter 3. Shadows in the Manor. The Harrington Manor loomed on the cliffs above Eldridge, its Gothic spires thrusting into the overcast sky like the jagged teeth of some ancient beast. The fog that cloaked Velvet Pier had crept inland, curling around the manor's stone walls, lending an air of foreboding to its ivy-draped facade. It was October 1932, and within these walls the air was thick with secrets, as palpable as the musty scent of old books and polished wood. Hercule Poirot, his patent leather shoes silent on the Persian rugs, paced the opulent study where Sir Reginald Harrington had once ruled his empire. The room was a testament to the man's wealth and ambition. Shelves lined with leather-bound tomes on commerce and history, a massive oak desk cluttered with papers, and a display case of antiquities, including daggers whose jeweled hilts glinted in the firelight. One such dagger, Poirot noted, was missing, now lodged in its owner's back on the pier below. "Order and method," Poirot murmured, his Belgian accent crisp as he examined a crystal decanter of port on the desk. He leaned closer, his waxed moustache twitching as he detected a faint, incongruous odor. Bitter almonds, a whisper of cyanide. Curious complexion. The room was vast, its high ceilings adorned with ornate plasterwork, its windows draped in heavy velvet that seemed to absorb the meager daylight. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows that danced like conspirators across the walls. Evelyn stood by a grand piano, her fingers tracing its keys absently, producing a faint, discordant note. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice trembling yet controlled. "I trust you can find who did this to my husband. He was everything to me." Poirot bowed, his eyes never leaving her face. "Madame, my deepest sympathies, but the heart,
It speaks truths the lips may conceal. Your husband's death, it has stirred many questions. May I ask of your evening, before the tragedy? Her eyes flickered, a momentary lapse in composure. We dined with guests, Victor, Edmund, a few others. Reginald was agitated. Business matters, you understand. I retired early, around 10. I was in my room when she faltered, pressing a lace handkerchief to her lips. When it happened. Poirot noted the hesitation, the way her fingers twisted the handkerchief. And this glove, embroidered E.H., found on the pier. Yours, perhaps? Evelyn's gaze sharpened. Mine, yes, but lost weeks ago. I swear it, monsieur. Her voice held a note of defiance, but her eyes darted to the door as footsteps approached. Victor Langford entered, his sharp features taut, his suit as immaculate as his alibi was vague. A man in his 40s, with slicked-back hair and a smile that seemed practiced. He exuded the confidence of a gambler holding a hidden ace. "Poirot, is it?" he said, extending a hand that Poirot shook lightly. "Tragic business, this. Reginald and I had our differences. Business, you know, but murder? Absurd." His left hand, Poirot observed, trembled slightly as he lit a cigarette, the match flaring briefly in the dim room. "Differences, Monsieur Langford?" Poirot's tone was mild, but his eyes were piercing. "Of what nature?" Langford exhaled a plume of smoke, his nonchalance strained. "Reginald was cautious, too conservative. I pushed for fact."
Head. "No, monsieur. I was in the servants' quarters, cleaning silver." Her voice wavered, and she retreated quickly, her apron rustling like a whisper of guilt. Edmund Harrington sauntered in, a young man of 25 whose handsome features were marred by a petulant scowl. His tailored jacket was slightly rumpled, a testament to late nights and reckless habits. He lounged in an armchair, one leg draped over the arm, exuding defiance. "Uncle's dead, and now I'm a suspect? Ridiculous," he scoffed. "I was at the Red Lion, playing poker with some chaps. Ask them." Poirot tilted his head. "And these chaps, they confirm this, Monsieur Harrington?" Edmund's bravado faltered. "Well, it was late, foggy. They'll remember, I'm sure." His fingers drummed nervously on the chair, and Poirot marked the sweat beading on his brow. Silas Thorne, summoned from his fisherman's shack, arrived last, his boots tracking mud across the pristine rugs. A grizzled man with a face weathered by salt and sun, his eyes burned with a quiet fury. "Harrington ruined me," he growled, his voice rough as the sea. "His factories dredged my fishing grounds, left me nothing. Owed me justice, he did." His boots, Poirot noted, matched the mud on the pier, but he claimed to have been at sea during the murder, mending nets in the fog. "An interesting claim, Monsieur Thorne," Poirot said, his tone neutral. "And this glove, this dagger, do they speak to you?" Thorne's jaw tightened. "Don't know nothing about gloves. And that dagger? One of his fancy toys. Never touched it." The interviews concluded, Poirot returned to the study, his mind a whirl of impressions. He examined the desk again, his gloved fingers brushing over papers. A letter fluttered to the floor, half hidden beneath a ledger, addressed to Amelia, its tone intimate, signed with Reginald's florid script. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured. An affair? A motive? He tucked the letter away, his thoughts racing. The suspects dispersed, but tension lingered like the fog outside. Forms, but the pieces mislead. As he prepared to retire, a servant delivered a note, slipped under his door. "Beware the widow's tears." Anonymous, written in a hurried scrawl. Poirot's pulse quickened. A warning or a threat? The manor's walls seemed to close in, their shadows deepening with deceit. Thunder cracked, shaking the windows, and in that moment a scream echoed from the cliffs below, sharp and fleeting, swallowed by the storm. Chapter 4. The Tide's Whisper. Dawn broke over Eldridge with a sullen gray light, the fog thinning just enough to reveal the restless churn of the North Sea against Velvet Pier's weathered pilings. The air was sharp with salt and the faint metallic tang of blood, a lingering reminder of Sir Reginald Harrington's murder. Hercule Poirot, his overcoat buttoned against the morning chill, stood at the pier's edge with Inspector Japp, their footsteps muffled by the damp planks. The sea whispered secrets, its waves lapping rhythmically, as if mocking the chaos of human affairs. Poirot's green eyes, sharp as cut glass, scanned the scene where Reginald's body had been found, the chalk outline now smudged by overnight drizzle. "The tide, mon ami," he said, his Belgian accent precise. "It is a great conspirator. It washes away much, footprints, truths, but not all." Japp, his hands thrust into his coat pockets, squinted into the haze. "High tide was around midnight, Poirot, when Harrington was killed. Convenient for the killer, no tracks left, save one." He pointed to a single boot print, partially preserved in a sheltered patch of mud near the pier's entrance, size 10, its tread distinct. "Might be something, might be nothing. The locals trudge through here daily." Poirot knelt, his gloved fingers hovering over the print without touching it. "No, Inspector, this is not nothing. A solitary print, preserved while others vanish. It is deliberate, a whisper from the guilty." He straightened, his gaze drifting to them to the fisherman's shack of Silas Thorne, a ramshackle hut perched on the shore, its timbers warped by years of salt and storm. Nets hung like spiderwebs, and the air reeked of fish and tar. Thorne, his face a map of wrinkles and resentment, leaned against a boat, his size 10 boots caked with mud, matching the pier's. "I told ye I was mending nets that night," he growled, gesturing to a pile of tangled ropes. "Didn't see Harrington, didn't touch him." Poirot's eyes narrowed, noting a scrap of velvet caught on the boat's splintered edge, crimson like the glove. "This, Monsieur Thorne, it is familiar, oui?" He held it up, the fabric glinting in the weak sunlight. Thorne's jaw tightened. "Planted, that's what. Someone's trying to pin this on me. Harrington stole my livelihood, dredged my fishing grounds for his cursed factories. I hated him, but I ain't no killer." Poirot pocketed the scrap, his mind whirring. A man with a grudge is a man with a motive, but a killer? We shall see. Back at Harrington Manor, the atmosphere was as oppressive as the gathering storm clouds. The Gothic spires loomed through the mist, and the wind rattled the leaded windows, as if the house itself were uneasy. In the drawing-room, Poirot summoned Amelia Croft, the maid, whose auburn hair and vivid blue eyes belied her servile role. She entered, her apron pristine, but her hands betraying calluses, marks of labor beyond a maid's duties. "Mademoiselle," Poirot began, his tone gentle yet probing. "You knew Sir Reginald well, intimately, perhaps." Amelia's cheeks flushed scarlet, and she clutched the edge of a chair. "He was kind to me, monsieur. Took me in when I was orphaned. But I wasn't on the pier. I swear it." Her voice cracked, and tears welled, but Poirot noted her eyes darted to the door, as if expecting interruption. "Kindness can breed loyalty, or betrayal," Poirot said softly. "This letter,
found in his study, suggests more.
Embezzlement, Monsieur Langford? A serious charge. And yet you did not report it to the authorities? Langford's smile was thin. Business disputes stay in-house. I thought we could settle it. The accusation hung heavy, a new thread in the tapestry. Poirot turned to the decanter in the study, its almond-like scent lingering in his memory. This port, it was poisoned. Cyanide, oui? Yet Reginald was stabbed. A curious redundancy. Unless, he paused, his grey cells aligning, unless the poison was a failed attempt, and the dagger a necessity. Japp, who had joined them, frowned. Two methods. That's overkill, Poirot. Or desperation, Poirot countered. A killer who plans poison but resorts to violence when it fails. Edmund Harrington entered next, his youthful arrogance undimmed despite the scrutiny. Aunt Evelyn knew about Reginald's affair with Amelia, he said, smirking. Jealousy's a fine motive, don't you think? His words were calculated, deflecting attention. But Poirot noted his hands, shaking slightly, perhaps from more than drink. Lady Evelyn, summoned again, paled at Edmund's accusation. Lies, she snapped, her composure fraying. Our marriage was strained, yes, but I bore it for the sake of stability. I knew of his dalliances, but I did not kill him. Her eyes, stormy as the sea, held a flicker of truth, or was it fear? Poirot assembled the clues in his mind. The glove, too convenient. The letter, exposing Amelia's affair. The boot print, matching thorns but possibly staged. The poisoned decanter, an unused weapon. And now Langford's claim of embezzlement. The puzzle forms, he murmured, but the pieces, they mislead. As evening descended, the storm drew closer, its thunder a low growl over the cliffs. Poirot stepped outside, the wind tugging at his coat. He revisited the pier in his mind, picturing the tide's rhythm, high at midnight, low by dawn. The boot print, preserved at low tide, suggested deliberation, not accident. A killer who knew the sea's schedule, perhaps a local like Thorne, or someone clever enough to mimic. Chapter 5. Veiled Alliances. The storm brewing over Eldridge cast Harrington Manor into a realm of shadows, its Gothic spires trembling under the weight of an impending tempest. The evening of October 1932 was heavy with the scent of rain and suspicion, the air within the manor's grand library thick with the musk of old leather and wax. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the room, his diminutive frame commanding despite the towering bookshelves that loomed like silent sentinels. The flickering candlelight, necessitated by a storm-induced power flicker, cast his silhouette in sharp relief, his waxed mustache a beacon of precision amid the chaos. He had gathered the suspects, Lady Evelyn Harrington, Victor Langford, Amelia Croft, Edmund Harrington, and, reluctantly summoned, Silas Thorne, under the pretense of discussing new developments. The atmosphere crackled with unease, each face a mask hiding motives as tangled as the storm clouds outside. Mes amis, Poirot began, his Belgian accent cutting through the tension like a scalpel. In the affair of Sir Reginald Harrington's murder, we find not a single thread, but a tapestry of alliances, veiled but not invisible to the little grey cells. His green eyes swept the room, noting every twitch, every glance. Lady Evelyn stood by the fireplace, her black morning dress absorbing the light, her hands clasped tightly. Victor Langford leaned against a bookshelf, his sharp features taut, a cigarette smoldering in his left hand. Amelia Croft hovered near the door, her auburn hair catching the candlelight, her calloused hands betraying her nervous fidgeting. Edmund Harrington slouched in a leather chair, his youthful arrogance dimmed by a sheen of sweat. Silas Thorne, his fisherman's coat dripping from the rain, glowered from the corner, his presence an intrusion in this opulent space. Poirot held up the velvet glove,
its embroidered EH glinting accusingly. This, found on velvet Pier, points to Madame Harrington, or so someone wishes us to believe. But let us consider another clue. He produced the crystal decanter from Reginald's study, its faint almond-like scent of cyanide now confirmed by Japp's chemist. Poison, beacon.
This is nonsense, Poirot. You're grasping at straws. Reginald and I had disagreements, yes, but I was in my office, working late. His left hand, Poirot observed again, betrayed a tremor as he stubbed out the cigarette. Edmund and I discussed buying out Reginald's shares, Langford continued, glancing at the nephew. He refused, but that's business, not murder. Edmund nodded, his petulance giving way to unease. It's true. Victor and I talked strategy, nothing more. I didn't need to kill Uncle. He'd cut my allowance, but I'd survive. His voice lacked conviction, and Poirot marked the sweat on his brow, the way his eyes darted to Langford as if seeking reassurance. Silas Thorne, unbidden, surged forward, his boots thudding on the parquet floor. Enough of this! The widow paid me to scare Harrington, not kill him. His voice was a growl, his weathered face flushed with anger. She wanted him shaken, said he was straying. I followed him to the pier, shouted a bit, then left. That's all. Lady Evelyn gasped, her composure shattering. Slander! I never spoke to this man about such things. Her eyes, stormy as the sea outside, flashed with indignation. But Poirot noted a flicker of fear. Was Thorne's accusation a lie, or a half-truth, twisted to deflect? Calm, mes amis, Poirot said, raising a hand. Accusations fly, but truth is patient. He turned to the boot print from the pier, size 10, matching Thorne's. This print, so conveniently preserved at low tide, too perfect, perhaps. A stage set by a clever hand. He studied Langford, whose left-handedness lingered in his mind. The dagger's angle suggested a left-handed strike, a detail not lost on the detective. Poirot's thoughts whirred, piecing together fragments. The glove, too obvious. The poisoned decanter, a failed plan. The letter, exposing Amelia's affair. Thorne's grudge, possibly exploited. He produced another clue, a hidden compartment in Reginald's desk, discovered that afternoon, containing letters suggesting an affair not between Reginald and Amelia, but Evelyn and intent. He paced, his grey cells aligning clues like stars in a constellation. The glove pointed to Evelyn, but its placement was theatrical. The poison suggested premeditation, yet the stabbing was impulsive. Thorne's print, Langford's hand, Amelia's tears, each a piece, but the picture remained incomplete. Outside, the fog thickened, cloaking Eldridge in secrecy. Poirot descended to the cliffs, drawn to the pier's siren call. The wind howled, tugging at his coat, and he sensed a presence, a shadow moving in the mist, too fleeting to identify. His heart quickened, but his resolve held firm. The killer watches, he murmured, but Poirot, he observes. Returning to his room, he found another note slipped under the door. Stop prying, or join him. The scrawl matched the first, anonymous, urgent, left-handed. A threat, or a plea? Poirot examined it under his lamp, noting the ink's faint smudge, the paper's cheap quality. A servant's stationery, perhaps, or pilfered from the manor's stores. The storm's crescendo shook the manor, lightning illuminating the Gothic arches. Poirot's mind raced. The killer was close, their desperation palpable. Was it Langford hiding embezzlement? Evelyn guarding a secret? Amelia betrayed by love? Edmund driven by debt? Or Thorne fueled by vengeance? The alliances were veiled, but cracks were forming. As Poirot locked his door, a creak echoed in the hall. A footstep, or the manner settling. The noose tightened, and the detective sensed the killer's next move was near. The storm raged on, and with it the promise of revelation or danger. Chapter 6. Echoes of the Past. The storm over Eldridge battered Harrington Manor with unrelenting fury, its winds howling like the ghosts of forgotten grievances. Within the manor's shadowed halls, the air was thick with the weight of secrets, each room a repository of the past's echoes. It was the evening of October 1932, and Hercule Poirot—
Little grey cells. They seek connections, mon ami. Each suspect carries a burden from years past, a motive rooted in time. Let us uncover these roots. He began with Sir Reginald himself, whose fortune was built on Eldridge's fishing industry, now a shadow of its former glory. Poirot had learned from town records, examined that afternoon in the manor's study, that Reginald's factories had expanded by acquiring coastal lands once owned by families like Silas Thorne's. Decades ago, Thorne's father, a prosperous fisherman, had lost his holdings to Reginald's ruthless deals, forcing the family into poverty. Vengeance, Poirot mused. It is a fire that burns long. Could Monsieur Thorne have struck to settle an old score? Japp frowned, rubbing his chin. Thorne's bitter, no doubt. Found the body too, convenient maybe. But that boot print on the pier, size 10, matches his. Could be him or someone wearing his boots to frame him. Précisément, Poirot agreed, his mind turning to the print's deliberate preservation at low tide, a clue too perfect to be accidental. He filed it away, moving to Amelia Croft, the maid whose calloused hands and tearful confession hinted at depths beyond her servile role. In the manor's archives, Poirot had found employment records. Amelia, orphaned at 12, was taken in by the Harringtons as a charity case. She grew up in this house, Poirot said. Under Reginald's roof, he was a father figure, perhaps, until affection turned intimate. The letter from Reginald found in the study promised her a future free from service, a motive for murder if he reneged, or if she feared exposure. Japp raised an eyebrow. That letter's damning, Poirot. If Evelyn knew of the affair, or if Amelia thought Reginald was cutting her out. Oui, but there is more, Poirot interjected. He produced another document, a will draft hidden in a locked drawer, suggesting Reginald planned to revise his estate. Amelia's name appeared, but crossed out. Disinherited? A lover scorned, or a plan thwarted? Poirot wondered aloud, his grey cells whirring. Next he turned to Edmund.
Poirot. That dagger's angle. Indeed, Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. The dagger, buried in Reginald's back, suggested a left-handed strike, a detail pointing to Langford, though not conclusively. Poirot recalled Langford's tremor, his slick demeanor masking unease. Monsieur Langford claims a business dispute. But what if he stole from the partnership, and Reginald discovered it? A motive to silence, no? Lady Evelyn's past was next. Her marriage to Reginald a subject of town gossip. 5 years ago, she was Evelyn Marlowe, a beauty with no fortune, wed to the wealthy widower in what many called a transaction. Poirot had found letters in her boudoir, discreetly examined during a brief absence, hinting at her discontent. One, unsent, spoke of enduring for the sake of security. Madame knew of her husband's affair, Poirot said, and bore it, she claims, for the lifestyle. But jealousy, it is a quiet poison. Did she hire Thorne to scare Reginald, as he alleges? Or more? Japp scratched his head.
Thorne's story about Evelyn paying him. It's fishy, but possible. She denies it, but her alibi's weak. Says she was walking the cliffs alone, reflecting, after dinner. Poirot's lips curved faintly. Reflecting in such fog. A widow's tears. They conceal much. He recalled the anonymous note. Beware the widow's tears. Was it a warning of her guilt, or a distraction? Silas Thorne's history deepened the puzzle. An old map, found in the manor's archives, showed Velvet Pier built on land once owned by Thorne's family, seized by Reginald's father in a dubious deal. The pier itself, it is a monument to his loss, Poirot said. Thorne's grudge is not merely personal, it is ancestral. Yet Thorne's claim of being at sea, mending nets, lacked witnesses, and the velvet scrap on his boat suggested involvement or manipulation. Poirot assembled the clues in his mind. The glove, a likely plant. The poisoned decanter, a
cry from the cliffs confirmed the worst. Amelia was found, unconscious, in a cove below, her lips tinged blue, cyanide, the same as the decanter. Jap, soaked from the search, cursed. Suicide, Poirot? Or another murder? Poirot knelt beside her, noting the forced marks around her mouth. Not suicide, mon ami. The killer silences those who know too much. Amelia stirred, alive but weak, whispering, He forced me, before slipping back into unconsciousness. The manor's shadows seemed to close in, the storm's howl a chorus to the unfolding tragedy. Poirot's mind raced. Amelia's survival was a crack in the killer's plan. Was it Langford covering his tracks? Evelyn eliminating a rival? Edmund desperate for inheritance? Thorne exacting revenge? Or a deeper alliance yet unseen? As Poirot returned to his room, the second note, "Stop prying or join him," burned in his pocket. The killer was watching, their desperation rising with the storm. A creak in the hall, a shadow at the window. Poirot locked his door, his grey cells alight. The past had spoken, but the present held the key, and the tide of truth was turning. Chapter 7. Fractured Alibis. The storm that ravaged Eldridge reached its zenith, transforming Harrington Manor into a fortress besieged by wind and rain, its Gothic windows rattling like the bones of the restless dead. The night of October 1932 was a maelstrom of chaos, the sea below Velvet Pier crashing with vengeful fury, as if echoing the turmoil within the human hearts entangled in Sir Reginald Harrington's murder. Hercule Poirot, his impeccable attire sodden from the cliff's spray, stood in the manor's grand hall, his green eyes alight with the fire of deduction. The discovery of Amelia Croft, poisoned and unconscious in a cove below, had shattered the fragile calm, turning suspicion into a whirlwind of fractured alibis. "The killer strikes again," Poirot murmured, his Belgian accent steady amid the uproar. "But this time they fail." And coves, their shouts muffled by the howling wind. Poirot joined them briefly, his patent leather shoes slipping on the slick rocks, the sea's roar drowning all but the pounding of his thoughts. Amelia was carried back on a stretcher, her pale face ghostly in the lightning flashes, her auburn hair matted with seawater. A doctor, summoned from town, pumped her stomach, muttering about luck and timing. "She'll live," he declared. But she saw her attacker, whispered something about a shadow with a left hand. Left hand? Langford, Poirot thought, the detail aligning with the dagger's strike. But alibis needed breaking. Back at the manor, Poirot assembled the household in the drawing room, the fire's crackle a feeble counter to the storm's rage. Candlelight flickered on worried faces. Servants huddled. Suspects summoned anew. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice commanding. "A second crime demands clarity. Where were you when Mademoiselle Croft vanished?" Victor Langford, his suit rumpled for the first time, lit a cigarette with his left hand. Deliberately, Poirot noted. "In my room, reviewing papers, alone as before." But Poirot pressed. A clerk from Langford's office, telephoned earlier by Japp, had seen him leave abruptly that evening, coat collar upturned against the rain. "A walk, perhaps?" Poirot suggested mildly. Langford's eyes narrowed. "Nonsense. The clerk's mistaken." Edmund Harrington, flushed from drink, sneered. "I was in the billiard room, potting balls. Servants saw me." But the poker game alibi from the murder night already wavered. His chaps at the Red Lion, questioned via constables, admitted bribing for silence. Their stories bought with Edmund's promises of debts forgiven. "You lie easily, monsieur," Poirot said, "but lies fracture under weight. Your debts to Langford, he pulls your strings, no?" Edmund paled, glancing at Langford. "He lent me money, yes, but I didn't touch Amelia." Silas Thorne, hauled back by constables, his boots' fingerprints smeared, but the angle screamed left-handed assailant. "The killer is bold," Poirot declared, "but careless now." Japp's men searched rooms. In Langford's, forged documents hinting at embezzlement deeper than claimed. In Edmund's, IOUs tying him to the partner. In Thorne's shack, raided earlier, a stash of cash, payment from an anonymous source, perhaps Evelyn. The velvet glove re-examined showed deliberate tearing, planted to frame. As dawn hinted through the storm clouds, Poirot confronted Edmund privately in the study. "You and Langford, you conspired, oui? Debts bound you, and Reginald's discovery threatened exposure." Edmund cracked, sweat beading. "Victor forced me, said he'd ruin me if I didn't help, provide an alibi, distract the old man to the pier. But I didn't kill him, and Amelia, she knew too much about the books." Thunder cracked, shaking the manor. Poirot's grey cells pieced it. Langford, the mastermind, embezzling, luring Reginald. Edmund, the pawn. Thorne, the red herring with his grudge. Evelyn, the jealous observer. Amelia, the loose end, silenced but surviving. A scream pierced the night. From the pier, carried on the wind. Japp bolted, Poirot following. Silas Thorne, attacked in the fog, lay wounded, a gash on his arm. "Shadowy figure, left-handed swing," he gasped. The net closed, alibis shattered. The killer, cornered, would strike again, or confess. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The end neared. Chapter 8. The Gathering Storm. The storm over Eldridge had reached a fever pitch, its fury transforming Harrington Manor into a besieged fortress, its Gothic walls trembling under the onslaught of wind and rain. The night of October 1932 was a maelstrom, the North Sea's roar echoing the chaos within the manor's opulent halls. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand drawing-room, its velvet drapes swaying as if stirred by unseen hands, the candlelight casting eerie flickers across the faces of the assembled suspects. Lady Evelyn Harrington, Inspector. He turned to the suspects, his gaze piercing. "The murder of Sir Reginald Harrington. It is a tapestry woven with deception. Velvet gloves, poisoned decanters, forged letters. But the storm, it strips away pretense.
Let us unravel this weave. He began with the scream's aftermath. Silas Thorne, his fisherman's coat torn, clutched a bruised arm. "Came at me from the fog," he growled, his weathered face etched with pain. "Left-handed swing, with a club or some such. Didn't see the face, but they meant to shut me up." His eyes flicked to Victor Langford, a silent accusation. Poirot nodded, filing the detail. "Monsieur Thorne, you claim innocence, yet your boot print marks the pier, and a velvet scrap clings to your boat. Coincidence or conspiracy?" Thorne's scowl deepened, but he offered no reply, his silence a heavy weight. Turning to the others, Poirot outlined the case's core. Sir Reginald was stabbed, but the decanter in his study held cyanide, a poison meant for Amelia Croft, who survived an attempt on her life. Why two methods? The poison, it was a plan that failed, forcing the killer to the dagger's intimacy. He held up the glove, its embroidered EH a taunting clue. This, a red herring to accuse Madame Harrington, planted with care. But the tide, it tells another story. He explained the boot print, preserved at low tide when others were washed away. A deliberate act, to point to Monsieur Thorne, or to mislead us from the true culprit. His gaze settled on Victor Langford, whose left hand fidgeted with a cigarette case. "Monsieur Langford, you are left-handed, oui? And your papers claim Sir Reginald embezzled, yet they bear signs of forgery. Your hand, perhaps?" Langford's face tightened, his smile thin as a blade. "Nonsense, Poirot. Those documents are genuine. Reginald was bleeding the company dry. I confronted him, yes, but I didn't kill him." His voice was smooth, but a bead of sweat betrayed him, glistening in the candlelight.
Eyes, stormy as the sea outside, held a plea or a lie. Poirot paced, his mind a whirl of connections. The glove, too obvious, was a frame. The poisoned decanter, meant for Reginald, had failed, leading to the dagger's use, a left-handed strike. The boot print, staged to implicate Thorne. And the letters, some genuine, some forged, pointed to hidden alliances. "The killer," he said, "is cunning, weaving clues to mislead. But the little grey cells, they see through." He revealed a critical discovery. Papers in Reginald's safe, uncovered that afternoon, proving Langford had been siphoning funds from the factories for years. "Embezzlement, Monsieur Langford," Poirot said, holding up the documents, their ink damningly clear. "Sir Reginald discovered your theft. You confronted him on the pier, and when words failed, the dagger spoke." Langford's composure cracked, his left hand clenching. "Lies! You've no proof!" But his voice shook, and Poirot noted the room's sudden stillness, the suspect's eyes fixed on him. Edmund gasped, stepping back. "Victor, you said we'd just pressure him. You never said—" He stopped, realizing his admission. "He threatened to expose my debts," Edmund blurted. "But I didn't know about murder." Poirot's gaze softened, but his tone was firm. "Monsieur Edmund, you were complicit, providing an alibi for Monsieur Langford, coerced by your debts. A pawn, perhaps, but not innocent." Amelia, trembling, whispered, "Victor, he came to me after dinner, asking about the decanter. I thought he was just curious." Her voice trailed off, horror dawning. Lady Evelyn stepped forward, her face pale but resolute. "I suspected Victor's dealings," she said. "Reginald told me he'd found discrepancies. I urged him to go to the police, but he wanted to handle it himself." Her voice broke. and Poirot noted genuine grief. Or a masterful act. Thorn, silent until now, muttered, "Langford offered me money to plant that velvet."
Lightning flashed, illuminating the room's tense tableau. And then another scream from the cliffs, closer now. The suspects froze, and Poirot's pulse quickened. "The killer moves," he murmured, "and the storm will not shield them."
Chapter 9. The Velvet Deception. The storm over Eldridge raged on, its thunder a relentless drumbeat echoing the tension within Harrington Manor's grand drawing room. The night of October 1932 cloaked the Gothic estate in shadows, the flickering candlelight casting ghostly patterns across the velvet drapes and polished mahogany. Hercule Poirot stood at the room's center, his diminutive frame a beacon of calm amid the suspects' mounting unease. Lady Evelyn Harrington, Victor Langford, Amelia Croft, Edmund Harrington, and Silas Thorne stood in a strained semicircle, their faces etched with fear, defiance, or guilt. The scream from the cliffs moments ago lingered like a phantom, amplifying the sense of an unraveling mystery. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his Belgian accent sharp as a polished blade, "the deception in this affair is as smooth as velvet. But the little gray cells, they cut through to the truth." Inspector Japp, his coat still damp from the cliffside search, stood by the door, his eyes scanning the room. "That scream was a warning, Poirot," he said, his voice low. "Thorne's attack wasn't random. Someone's desperate to keep us off the scent." Poirot's green eyes gleamed, his waxed mustache steady as he paced. "Précisément, Inspector. The killer weaves a tapestry of lies, velvet gloves, poisoned decanters, forged letters, but each thread frays under scrutiny." He held up the glove, its embroidered E.H., a taunting clue. "This, we thought, accused Madame Harrington. But the initials, they mislead. E.H., not Evelyn Harrington, but perhaps Edmund Harrington. Or a fabrication entirely." Edmund flinched, his youthful arrogance crumbling. "Me? That's absurd. I didn't touch any glove." His voice cracked, and Poirot noted the sweat on his brow, a sign of silenced him. The room fell silent, the storm's roar a distant echo. Langford's left hand trembled, the cigarette case slipping to the floor with a clatter. Amelia Croft, pale but resolute, spoke up, her voice trembling. "Victor, he asked me about the decanter days before. I thought he was curious about Reginald's habits, but then the poison." Her blue eyes filled with tears, and Poirot saw truth in her fear. "He tried to kill me too, because I knew too much." Poirot nodded, his mind aligning clues. "Mademoiselle Croft, your affair with Sir Reginald made you a threat. The killer poisoned you to silence your knowledge, but you survived, a crack in their plan." He turned to Silas Thorne, whose weathered face was a mask of defiance. "And you, Monsieur Thorne, accepted payment from Langford to plant the velvet scrap on your boat to frame Madame Harrington. Your grudge against Reginald made you a willing pawn." Thorne's fists clenched. "I needed the money. Langford said it'd just scare Harrington, make him rethink his deals. I didn't know he'd kill him." His voice was raw, and Poirot noted the sincerity or a well-rehearsed act. Lady Evelyn stepped forward, her black dress stark against her pale skin. "I suspected Victor's schemes," she said, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "Reginald told me of discrepancies in the accounts. I urged him to act, but he wanted to confront Victor privately. I never hired Thorne, I swear it." Her eyes, stormy as the sea, held Poirot's gaze, and he sensed a mix of grief and resolve.
Poirot paced, his grey cells weaving the threads. The glove, a forgery to mislead. The decanter, a failed poison attempt. The boot print, staged to implicate Thorne. The letters, some genuine, some false. Langford's embezzlement, the motive driving the murder. The killer, he said, planned poison but resorted to the dagger when it failed. The glove and print were distractions, but the left-handed strike points to one among us. He turned to Edmund, whose face paled. Monsieur Harrington.
You had access, Monsieur Langford, to the weapon. Your fingerprints, perhaps, linger on its jewels. Langford's composure shattered. "You've no proof!" he shouted, but his step backward betrayed panic. Japp moved closer, his hand on his whistle, ready to act. Poirot's voice softened, but his words cut. "The deception is velvet smooth, but it frays. The embezzlement, the confrontation, the dagger's strike, all point to you, Monsieur Langford. You lured Reginald to the pier, stabbed him when poison failed, and framed others with glove and print." He paused, letting the accusation settle. "But one question remains. The notes, were they yours or another's hand?" Amelia's voice broke the silence. "I sent them, monsieur. I saw Victor with the decanter, suspected him. I was afraid. For myself. For you." Her confession was a whisper, but it carried the weight of truth. Lightning flashed, illuminating the suspects' faces, Langford's fury, Evelyn's relief, Edmund's shame, Thorne's grim nod, Amelia's resolve. Poirot's grey cells hummed, the puzzle nearly complete, but a final twist lingered. Had Langford acted alone, or was another alliance hidden in the shadows? As thunder shook the manor, Langford bolted for the door, his left hand fumbling for the knob. Japp lunged, catching him by the collar. "Not so fast, Langford!" he barked as the room erupted in gasps. Poirot stood calm, his voice rising above the chaos. "The velvet deception unravels, but one piece remains. The killer's desperation grows, and the storm will not hide them." The wind howled, and the manor's shadows seemed to close in, whispering of a final revelation yet to come. Chapter 10. Resolution on the Pier. The storm that had battered Eldridge through the night of October 1932 finally broke, giving way to a dawn that painted the sky in hues of pale gold and soft gray. Velvet Pier stretched into the North Sea, its weathered planks glistening with the remnants of rain, the velvet-upholstered benches catching the first light like faded jewels. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of salt and renewal, as if the sea itself had a no-nonsense mustache, bristling with expectation. "You've kept us waiting, Poirot," he said, his voice gruff but tinged with respect. "That scream last night, Thorne's attack, it's all tied to the killer, isn't it? Lay it out, man." Poirot's green eyes gleamed, his gaze sweeping the assembled faces. "Oui, Inspector. The killer is among us. Their web of lies, velvet gloves, poisoned decanters, forged letters, woven to conceal a singular motive, greed." He paused, letting the words settle like a stone in the still air. "Sir Reginald Harrington was murdered here, on this pier, not by chance, but by design. Let us reconstruct the crime. He began with the night of the murder, the fog cloaking Velvet Pier like a conspirator. Reginald, after a tense dinner at Harrington Manor, had walked here alone, drawn by a note, later found crumpled in his pocket, promising a meeting to settle a dispute. The note, Poirot said, producing a facsimile, was written in a left-handed scrawl, promising resolution of a business matter. It lured him to his death. Poirot turned to Victor Langford, whose sharp features were taut, his left hand clenched at his side. "Monsieur Langford, you are the architect of this crime.
Your embezzlement from the Harrington factories, discovered by Sir Reginald, threatened ruin. You forged documents to shift blame, but he confronted you. That night, you arranged to meet him here, under pretense of negotiation. Langford's eyes blazed, his voice a snarl. You've no proof, Poirot. Those papers you found, they show Reginald's theft, not mine. But his left hand betrayed him, trembling as he gripped his cigarette case, the same hand that had wielded the dagger. Poirot raised a gloved hand, silencing him. Non, monsieur. The papers in Reginald's safe, uncovered yesterday, bear your forgeries, ink too fresh, signatures inconsistent, and the dagger, from his collection, repaired by you weeks ago. Your fingerprints, unsmeared, adorn its jeweled hilt. He produced a jeweler's receipt, its date damp.
Langford paid me to plant that velvet scrap on my boat, said it'd scare Harrington into a deal. I didn't know he'd kill him. His voice was rough, but his eyes held a flicker of shame for his role. Poirot turned to Amelia Croft, her auburn hair catching the morning light, her blue eyes weary but clear. Mademoiselle Croft, you survived a poisoning attempt, cyanide, forced upon you to silence your knowledge of Langford's inquiries about the decanter. Your notes, beware the widow's tears, and stop prying or join him, were warnings sent to protect yourself and alert me. Courageux, mademoiselle. Amelia's voice was soft but firm. I saw Victor with the decanter, monsieur. I suspected, but I was afraid. I wrote those notes to keep him at bay. Her confession drew a nod from Poirot, who saw truth in her resolve. Edmund Harrington, his youthful bravado gone, stood pale and trembling. Victor forced me to lie, Poirot. Said he'd ruin me, call in my debts. I gave him an alibi, but I swear I didn't know he'd kill Uncle. His voice broke, and Poirot's gaze softened, though his judgment was firm. Monsieur Edmund, you were a pawn, coerced by debt, but complicity carries its own weight. You will face consequences, though not the gallows. Edmund hung his head, shame etching his features. Poirot turned to Lady Evelyn, whose stormy eyes met his with a mix of grief and gratitude. Madame, you are innocent of murder, but not of secrets. Your plan to divorce Reginald, hidden in your letters, was your own affair, not a motive, but a shadow that misled. You suspected Victor's schemes, yet your silence protected the manor's stability. Evelyn nodded, her voice a whisper. I loved Reginald in my way. I endured his betrayals for our life here. Now, I am free. Her words carried the weight of a widow unshackled, stepping into a new dawn. Poirot's gaze returned to Langford, whose defiance crumbled under the weight of
Recompense. Mademoiselle Croft, your courage aids your recovery. Monsieur Edmund, reform may yet redeem you. Madame Harrington, your future is yours to shape.
The suspects dispersed, Jap leading Langford away in handcuffs. The pier, once a stage for murder, stood serene, the dawn light gilding its planks. Poirot lingered, his gaze on the horizon where sea met sky. The little gray cells, they triumph, he murmured, twirling his mustache. Order is restored, and the truth shines like the sun. As gulls wheeled overhead, their cries a hymn to closure, Lady Evelyn approached, her face softened by relief. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. You've given me peace. She turned, walking into the dawn, a widow no longer defined by velvet or tears. Amelia, supported by a servant, smiled faintly, her strength returning. Edmund, Chastened, vowed to settle his debts honestly. Thorn, grumbling, returned to his shack. His grudge eased by promised reparations. Poirot adjusted his hat. His work complete. The sea whispered peace. Its waves a lullaby for Eldridge's wounds. The mystery of Velvet Pier was solved, and Hercule Poirot, the little Belgian, walked back to the manor, his heart light, his gray cells at rest.